Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to GCAP, bright and early in the morning. This is a mouthful of a title there. Those of you that know me probably aren't surprised. I do like to talk, so no surprises, a lot to get through here, but and great to see some friendly faces here for sure. So this talk will go along, it's going to go two ways. I'm either going to talk too fast and race through everything, or I'm going to talk too much and we'll have trouble getting through everything, but I'll do my best to get through a lot. But today, really, the goal here is really about getting you into a mindset about publishing. This is something, obviously, a lot of our industry is developer-focused here. There's a lot of builders. It's not something we're always touching, is the publishing and marketing side of the business, but it's an important area that we all really need some level of skills in. So I'm going to talk through a lot. We're going to go pretty quick. But if there's anything you want to talk about, you probably didn't miss the Xsolla booth out the front. We've got a team here, so we'll be here all week, so come and chat to us, and we'd love to learn more about you and your studios. So diving in, so for those who don't actually know me, I'm a bit of a nerd. I've been doing this a while. This will be year 30 for me in December, which is crazy. Sega Aussiesoft, 1994. But I'm not a developer. I come from the dark side, or the side with the red lightsabers, as I get told. But I've worked indie, I've worked AAA, I've worked agencies, so definitely understand what's needed. I've raised money myself, I've done all those sort of things. So I have a pretty broad experience across the industry, but just wanted to talk to everyone because when I joined Xsolla, I kind of naively thought that everybody out there just understood the industry. I mean, we all play games, we all go to EB Games, we do pre-orders, all of these things, but I was actually quite surprised how much was known, so not known what's under the hood, but our market here, we don't have that many publishers. I mean, a lot of people get international publishers. I mean, it's fantastic now. We've got Playside, we've got a few studios, but that exposure is not necessarily there. So I really just want to give some insights. I think like a publisher, it's all I know. So I just really want to go through what I've been discussing as I talk to studios sort of day in, day out. And really just trying to get you into that mindset of thinking and acting like a publisher, because it's a great skill base that you're going to need. But let's get to know you a little bit as a marketer. It's all about audience for me. So quick show of hands, how many in the room are working on a first game for your studio? Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah, no surprise there. Who's looking for a publisher? Yep, pretty much the same. And who needs funding? Pretty much everybody, yeah. So now we have an audience cohort. So thank you very much. You've just done my first marketing survey for me. But that's a pretty good show of sort of the industry that a lot of us out there are building. We're looking for that exposure. We either need a publisher or we're going to end up sort of self-publishing. So how do you really think about that? So let's dive in a little bit about today. So firstly today, we'll just touch quickly on the industry. I mean, this is the industry we're operating in. We really want to understand that environment. We'll talk about publishers and really dive into how they're thinking. I mean, it's sort of the only way I know to think, so I'll try and give you some thoughts about how I'm looking at projects. And then we'll talk a little bit about pitching, because obviously that leads to pitching. And there's obviously a lot of talks out there about how to do the pitch, but I really want to, again, put the lens on of thinking as the publisher when I look at that deck. What am I thinking about when a deck comes towards me? And then the backup plan. The backup plan is your plan B. Some of you will end up self-publishing, so how do you do that? And then just quickly, I'm just going to talk quickly about Xsolla. We're not going to go into that too much today. You can come and talk to us through the week, but just give you a little bit of an insight. So just starting on the industry that we know, this is probably no surprise to a lot, but this is just Steam. The number of games are incredible. I mean, over 14,000 games on Steam last year. We're already tracking at 12, nearly 13 now, and we've still got another quarter. So this is incredible. And I mean, it's fantastic for the industry. It's never been easier to make a game, but it's also never been harder. It's fragmented out there. There's a lot of competition out there. So with a saturated market, that top 1% to 5% is trying to find cut through, and that is not easy. And this is just Steam. I mean, if we stack mobile on top, that's literally tens of thousands on top as well. So publishers are spoilt for choice. I mean, when you're going to them with your project, I mean, they've got a lot to choose from. So finding that way to cut through is really challenging. And I think there's some really scary numbers. We don't necessarily want to start off on a scary number, but 90% of indie games on Steam are making less than $10,000. And yes, we know there's obviously student projects and things like out there. But even when you go to $100,000, $1 million, that drop-off is down in single percentages. So getting that cut through has never been harder, while making the games has been easier. So lots of work. So we know that, but the industry obviously is growing as an industry, an entertainment industry. We love to talk about being bigger than the games and the movies and the music industry combined, which we are, which is fantastic. We're tracking probably about 5 or 6% year-on-year growth. So we're in an amazing industry. It's just getting harder, and how do we succeed? But we also know there's nuance under that hood as well. When we're talking about what's happening under the hood of that growing industry, player behaviour is unpredictable. I mean, we're seeing stats where people are playing fewer games, but for longer. But then we see positives like 5% increase in indie games. So we know out of COVID that a lot of AAAs were dried up. You needed things to play, so you'd find these indie games. And that's really created a healthy sort of environment there of more and more indie games being played, which is fantastic. But it's still nuanced. It's very complicated under there. But the real takeaway is that those publishers are trying to sign you up and pick your project are so spoiled, and they're really not sure what to bet on right now. And that comes through in their funding. I mean, we're seeing this. This is a roller coaster. And I mean, the positive on the far right is there is some healthy uptick we have seen this year. There's a little bit of back to supporting new projects, a little bit of positivity. And obviously that Q3 is a bubble. We'll probably never see that again. It was COVID, it was Web3, it was over-signing titles. So we're sort of bouncing back, but it's really difficult for publishers and investors to know where to put their money. So a lot of good signs there, though. So it is positive for the future. But what does that really mean for today? I mean, when you come off a spike like that, it's not the glory days we had, I'm old enough to remember, back in the 2012s when it was very buoyant, but it's also not 2022 anymore with the COVID spike. So that funding landscape in the last couple of years was definitely crazy. We're not going to see that again. There's new factors as well, like innovation, which is positive and negative. But again, publishers and investors are just not really sure where to put their money, what projects are going to succeed. But it's really just this competition, fragmentation, discoverability in the market is very, very hard. So publishers and investors are very nervous right now. So really it's going back to an old school way. I mean, they were very conservative. I mean, it's really only been the last 5 years or so that we've had the introduction of dedicated venture capital firms for gaming as well. I mean, prior to that, it was tech investors. So those VCs, if you're pitching to them, you know how conservative they are. So we're really seeing our industry sort of shape and go back to that conservatism. So that's really summed up here. It's back to a slow and conservative market. And what does that really mean? They're going to focus more on due diligence. Those glory days of going in for a Web3 pitch with a couple of slides and getting some money are gone. You've got to have your diligence. The investor's doing it. You've got to have your studio in shape. And that's going to lead to longer decisions. So you do need to plan that when you're out raising money, it may not just take 3 to 6 months, it may take 2 years. So you've got to be expected for that because they're taking their time, they're watching the market. You've got to have a stronger business case to cut through 14,000 Steam games. You've really got to stand out from the crowd. So that's very, very important. And then it's really just that return to fundamentals, as I was saying. The venture capital world has traditionally been very conservative. There's a lot of due diligence and process. The games industry has kind of exploded there, but we're now sort of stabilising back to sort of a very structured way of pitching and raising money. So highly competitive, but thinking about publishers, let's dive into how a publisher is thinking, because you're sending them their decks. And I just want to clarify, I'm saying publishers, I'm saying investors. Of course, they are different and they're very nuanced, but for the purpose of today, I'm really just talking about those that you're talking to where you can get a source of revenue. So I'll interchange them, I'll probably mix them up, but effectively, we're talking about people that are going to help advance your studio. So this slide is really simple, but this slide comes up all the time. And this comes to that naive position I had, art versus business. And typically for this industry here, I mean, there's a lot of passion projects. There's a lot of people coming off the global financial crisis where Australia in particular was very much a AAA work-for-hire type studio. And then that splintered into all these passion projects. And the art's fantastic. I mean, the governments have been amazing in supporting us, giving us grants. But you really need to decide, are you building a business? Because that's what a publisher and investor is thinking about. Are you commercially viable? That's a phrase I don't hear that often. And it's something we really need to think about. It's been a long time since EA referred to the A as Electronic Arts. But it is a business, and that's what the publishers are thinking about. And it's not about, I mean, if you want to make passion projects and you want to make art, don't talk to the publishers, because they're looking for a return on investment. That's what government grants can be for, and you can raise a few $100,000. But if you're serious about this business, you've got to step up. You've got to put the time and investment into thinking about the business side as much as you do the coding side, because that's what they're looking for, and they want to see you present that. So, and to illustrate that, if we think about publishers and studios, I mean, you're sitting in front of them with a deck. What's running through their mind? They're thinking about things like this: product market fit, what favourable terms are going to work in there where in terms of royalties and shares. They want security you can ship the product you're saying you're going to be able to ship. That's an important one for them, especially for new teams that are working on first games. There's a high risk factor there about whether you'll actually hit that last milestone. They're looking for good release windows. How does it fit into their schedule? Do they have 3 other roguelike games coming in the next 14 months? So those things are important. And then, of course, the risk versus return and profit. They're immediately sizing up the size of your project and how much they're going to make as a return. But what are you, sorry about that. What are you thinking about here? You're thinking about money. You need money. You need to finish the game. You need marketing. You need QA, porting, all of these things, which they need that and acknowledge that too. But these are very operational terms. These are very operational things that are going to come through in the project. They're not necessarily something you're diving into in that first couple of meetings. Those first couple of meetings, you're courting these publishers. They're getting to know you. They're looking to build trust. So you really want to align the conversation, because right here, we're not really talking the same language other than sort of profit and success. So as I said, these things are important to the publishers and investors, but you really want to shape the pitch and how you're talking to them to something that they're talking about, which is sizing the business in a language that they understand, because your ultimate goal here is you're trying to sell them on your business vision. So start with that. That should really be your focus. And we'll talk a bit more about this as we go through this. To really reinforce that, when the publishers are looking at that, you've asked them, and caveats, full caveats here, this is not a real publisher, this is not a real P&L spreadsheet. But it's, as an illustration, this is not that far off the mark. You could think about an indie game where your development budget is $500,000. So then you're assuming that publisher's bringing in $300,000 to another $500,000. Could be anything like this in terms of marketing costs, operation costs, their costs. So they're immediately saying on their books, you're $1 million project. So even if they just quickly sum, all right, you're $40 on Steam, take out Steam's fees, $28 they've got to make per unit, their mind is immediately going to, well, where's my break even? Just to make back that million. And this is a rough ballpark. There are other costs as well. That's 35,000 units on Steam. And they're thinking in terms of 3x, 5x, 10x. I mean, if they put $1 million into your project, they're just immediately, well, we're going to break even, we're going to make 3, 5, 10 would be fantastic. So they've already sized you at a 3 million, 5 million. And you look at that, even at a $40 game, and obviously a lot of indie projects are $20, those units go up. I mean, have you assessed your game? Will your game do 150,000 units on Steam? How realistic is that? That's what they're thinking when they look at your project. And the thing for them as well is they're looking at your project, so call it that your project was $1 million, but a lot of them in particular, and obviously this is oversimplified, but there's a lot of publishers out there that might be doing 1 game a month. So they sign up 12 titles, $12 million they've invested that year. The scary thing is they know probably 8 of those titles won't break even. They won't even make the $1 million. It's very, very high. So I just made some numbers up here, but let's call it that two hit that break even, 1 hits 5x, 1 hits 10x. So they've made back 25 million. That looks great. 52% margin is what they're thinking. So invested in 12 titles, some won, some lost. That's positive for them. But they've got to pay you in terms of royalties. And then they've got all the other costs as well, operations. There's a lot more to this. So they're already working in a business of 27% just off the royalties and fees, and this is risky. I mean, a lot of those games won't even make back that 4 million. This is what they're thinking. This is what's running through their mind. And yes, a big publisher's got more than the 12 titles. They've got their catalogue, but they're really sizing where you fit in that catalogue. Are you going to succeed? Are you going to be one of those 8 that doesn't break even? They obviously don't want that to happen, but they know statistically that that is going to happen. So you've really got to position yourself about how do you not be in that market. And 27%, anyone that's worked in any other businesses and other industries, that's not a high operating margin. Once you take up all the other costs, that would come down much lower. I mean, from AAA days, I can tell you, the publishers are working with 60s to 80% margins. So indie publishing is quite risky. So that's the space you're playing in. That's the conversation they're having in their mind and how they're thinking. So it's really important that that's what you want to start, at least when you're talking to them early. But to be more positive, when will they invest? They're going to invest when they believe there's an audience for your game. And this is really important because most games are not creating new audiences. You're stealing market share from somebody else's game. So you've really got to know that somebody is playing other games right now. They're taking the time. What's going to drag them across? So you've got to convince them in your vision that your game is going to move that audience. And then they're going to believe in you when you can ship that game. As I said, if you're on a first project, one of the highest risk factors is first project, first team. Can they get a game out of the gate? That's a very important thing. So these things are really going to be the sum of all of those things once they size the project and they think it's going to work. Is there an audience for it and can you ship it? It's going to be really important. And believe here is really important. I mean, none of us really know. We're all betting in this world, but you need to convince them and believe them. So your vision is going to be really important. And I obviously talked about publishers and investors. I've sort of generalised here, but they are different. They all have their nuance. And when you're pitching and talking to publishers and investors, you are going to have to keep that in mind because they all have the space they play in. They're focused on that space. It might be a genre, it might be a niche, it might be a size of a project or a size of a team. These things are important to them. And then they'll have a particular model, and that model may or may not work for you. So you've really got to do your homework as well on who they are. And also, it's important to be mindful. I mean, these are your passion projects. You're emotionally invested and attached to these projects. To them, they're business decisions. So you might have a great game, but it might not be a great investment for them, and it may be just because of their model. So don't take it to heart. Just move on to another publisher. It may not always work. Have confidence in what you're doing and pitch that vision. So I want to talk in the next stage about pitching and that vision, because obviously all conversations, and even if you're self-publishing and building your own game, you still got to really think about that pitch yourself. You've got to get that sharp. What's your thesis? And similar to the art versus business, this is something we see a lot as well. And I won't talk too much about Xsolla, but some of you would know about the Xsolla Funding Club. So we see a lot of games pitch decks. They come into our funding club, thousands per year. So you see some commonalities. And really what I'm trying to state here is your product deck is not your pitch deck. And I see many, many decks that talk about your game. It's a product deck. That publisher doesn't need to be bombarded too early with all that product information. Yes, you have to sell them on that vision and why it's so important, but you need that commercialization aspect in that deck. That's what they're looking for very early. And they want to see that you understand that because that's going to help them build confidence. So make sure you have it together because particularly those who are going for screen grants, we see a lot of screen grants locally, then the deck comes across to Xsolla Funding Club. And the screen grants don't ask for that commercialisation or it's very basic. So just be mindful that you need to put a bit more into that. But we'll talk about that in a sec. I'm going to go through some real examples about things that are important to the deck that can help sort of turn that product deck into a commercial deck. So also keep in mind who your audience is for this deck. The audience is that publisher and investor, and it's really important to know you're not persuading them in those first few meetings to even play your game. They're really looking and assessing the project, the team, where does it fit in my roadmap, all those things that are running through their mind before they've really dive right down and go, do I love this game? Yes, of course, some of them will play the game. That's not a thing. But you don't need to be walking to Gamescom and slapping them with a demo and saying, play this. I mean, there are publishers that do work that way and respond to that, but really your goal is you're getting them to invest in your studio. And this is a business decision. So think of it like a small business operator. How would you be pitching if you had to go to the bank and raise money? Keep that mindset when you're pitching with your decks. And then you're presenting that investment opportunity. They want to see, they're thinking that 3x, 10x in their mind. What am I going to make if I put $1 million into this project? So your aim of that pitch as well is, what is your outcome? Be clear on what you want to get from that meeting, and especially those first couple of meetings. It's really conversations. They're looking to get to know you. They have to believe in you, that you can deliver and deliver this project. So they're looking as much about who you are, how you operate, and what you present as what you're presenting. And you really need to make it hard to say no. They need to walk away. If they're a Gamescom, they've probably seen 200 games. If they're a scout, how do they walk away and go, oh yeah, that's right, there was that game, I've really got to follow that one up. That's an important thing, so make sure that that's front and centre. So we'll talk about some of that in terms of practice. And as I said, there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of online resources that are fantastic about what to put in a pitch deck. But your pitch deck really needs to tell a story. It really needs to deliver that vision. And there really isn't a perfect pitch deck. Plenty of people will tell you, I don't know what it is, I've raised money, and every meeting somebody says, oh, your deck would be perfect if you just did this. And you end up chasing your own tail. So there are obviously things you need to include, but be really clear about what you need to see. But some of the things, we'll talk through these, so I'm not going to go through each point here now. We'll talk through these in a little bit of detail now. But just be clear on that vision, work through these processes and make sure you've got the answers for these. There's a lot more you could put in, but let's go into it. So the elevator pitch is really important. And this, I can't stress enough how important this is. I don't know how many games in my life I've signed off 2 screenshots and a single text and a title. You already in your mind of go, yeah, it's a roguelike with this and it's cross-platform and it's got multiplayer, great, got it. It's going to do this many units at this price point. You've already summed that up. Sometimes I don't even read the next couple of sentences. And I mean, it's not always like that, but those first key elements are really the first door opener of what somebody takes as an impression from your game. So it's very important. So 1 or 2 sentences, be really clear, get some curiosity in there and set the mood for your game. And then in terms of bad example, this is what we'll see. And your lore is fantastic. I mean, your wiki, this is important. I mean, this is your passion project, this is your baby. It's not that this isn't important, but this is not important early in that phase of these discussions. If they're coming on board and they're courting you and they're getting to know you and the deal's getting closer, of course they're going to want to dive and learn a lot more about the product. But really, at the first start, they're just trying to work out, well, one, as a scout, they're probably just aligning out of those 200. Where's the 10 out of the 200 that need to surface to the top of the pile? So those first couple of assets in your elevator pitch are really important. The other thing is obviously your unique selling features. And this is really important. Obviously, your core game loop is very critical. What's your thesis? What are you trying to deliver here? And you need to be really clear here. Are you doing something that's tried and true, but you're innovating? Or are you doing something really unique? And there's no right or wrong answer for that. But you really need to have that clear in your mind because that's what you're really pushing forward here. And then what makes this game different? This looks really simple, but it's not as easy as people think. We see a lot of unique selling point slides that are generic. And generic is the key word here. It's engaging, it's this, it's that. These words are so generic, you see them on every deck. They don't really stand out as unique. You have to really think about what's unique. It's almost thinking about, well, if something's so unique to my game, the opposite should describe another game because it's actually that different that it describes something else. And that's sort of a good way to think about it. So it can definitely be genre, it can be things like this, but try and find, even if it's only 4 or 5, but what are you really adding to that core loop as an extension in terms of, is it innovation or is it something new or a real point of difference? Try and really double down because that's really what they're honing in on. And then lastly, we touched on this before, but why are people going to play your game? You're going to steal them off something else. Are they playing Apex Legends with their friends for 2 hours at night and then they get 1 hour afterwards that they play on their own as a solo player? What are they doing? Are they working through their indie library? What's going to get them excited? You really want to understand what's going to drag them across and migrate. So these are going to be key. And then, yeah, bad examples of those USPs. I won't talk these through, but yeah, unique storylines, amazing graphics. Everybody has those. None of us are building games that have got dull soundtracks or common storylines. So those things, they're just not unique. That's really the takeaway there. And there's actually Rami Ismail, it's pretty small there, but he talks a lot about this concept of building out these unique ones. The next one is product market fit. So with my marketing hat on, I talk audience, I talk marketing fit. This is, again, something really important. Where does your game fit in the market? And this is a really good example. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that these axes could be anything. And you don't necessarily have to be finding a gap in the market like this game in the top. I mean, that might be your thesis, that you're cutting out and you're doing something different. You could be doubling down on something like Call of Duty and saying, well, they missed this thing and we're going to do it better. But just have a real idea about where you're focused in terms of that position and fit. Because again, you're trying to steal audience, or in this case, you're sort of trying to create a new audience. But you've got to convey where that, and you've got to be clear on what you're going for, because that's going to be critical. And a bad example really is you can't be everything to everyone. We all want a game that obviously satisfies every player, that talks to everybody, and my game's for everybody, you hear. That ends up being sort of nothing to anybody. I mean, yes, of course there are games with mass appeal, but really focus on what you want to focus as a vision for your project. And then the next one, I talk about commercial viability. This is critical. Taking that product deck into a commercial deck, a pitch deck, is very much about comparable titles. And it's about getting these right. You have to make sure these are realistic. Don't talk about Elden Ring on a $500,000 project. It's just not a benchmark. You need to be talking about games that are similar. And these are where you're going to play. So that could be genre, could be size of the project. And you need to look at what their sales are. So we'll talk about this in a sec, but it's really important to benchmark yourself correctly, because we do see something that's just too wild, and it's just going to reduce confidence with that publisher, because they're going to go, well, you don't know your market. You're overshooting. Your team of 10 people is not going to deliver on that project. And again, there's no right or wrong. You don't have to be the most successful game. You just have to be relevant to where you think you're going to launch and where you're going to fit. So the best way to really think about that is come up with a spectrum. I mean, look at those games that are at the absolute low end. Maybe they are the $4,000 games on Steam. They've only done 5,000 units. And then look at what a realistic top end, and then be really honest about where you think your game's going to deliver. You don't have to be at either end of the spectrum. You're not convincing them that you're going to make this 2.3 million unless that's what you're pitching at. You're convincing the publisher that you know where you're going to sit on this schedule. And then that's going to build confidence that they actually go, well, no, I'm going to put that $1 million in, because you know what, I really do think you're going to do 10 to 12 million on that project. That million's going to be a pretty good return. You've benchmarked yourself well, and I'm confident that you know where you're at. That's what you're trying to convince here. It's not so much the units, they'll fluctuate. And obviously things like Steam Spy are great for this. You think about, where do you get these stats? There's VG Insights, there's a few SteamDB places you can go. But publishers are really looking for that understanding. So think of it as just like low case, mid case, best case here. This is nothing really surprising here, but just make sure that's really clear. And as I said, yeah, the worst example is that you ask for that 500,000 dev budget and you're benchmarking out games like this. You're just not going to do it. And then traction and progress, what do I mean by this? Really just make sure anything that you've gained, you including any awards, grants, festival inclusions, social achievements, anything that's positive is going to help your business case. You are trying to show that this project has already found an audience, people like it, look at the positivity. It's often hard if you're 2 years out and you're starting to build. But if there's anything and you're building those Discords, make sure you've got all of that, because these publishers, they're conservative now, they're going to take their time, they're pretty much chicken about what they're investing in. And especially in the venture capital world, they follow each other. They can often be chasing trends, so they don't even really know what to bet in. So just make sure you know why they should bet in with you. And then in terms of game details, there's a lot here. I'll just pull this up in one go, but obviously there's a lot of key elements that go into your deck that are important, the genres, platforms and things like that. Start and end dates, so make sure you have all of this in there. But the ones that are really important here is going to be the timeline, and I want to talk about this one specifically. So we see a lot of timelines in pitch decks, and these typically are what they look like, and fantastic, and it stops on release. And I say to studios, what's going to happen post-release? Well, we're going to have to do a post-patch launch, aren't you? Yes. That's going to take salaries. Have you factored that in? Does the publisher expect you're going to maintain it for 12 months and you've got sale updates? Have you considered that? I mean, you see a lot of people building their milestones to release, and then you run out of money. And the other thing as well is, even depending on the deal, even if you're successful, you might not see royalty checks for 12 months, 14 months. So how are you going to fund yourself? So it's not always easy to build runway of 6 months to a year post-launch, but always be mindful about that post-launch and build it into your deck up front. And why are you asking so much money? Well, I'm including post-launch. We need 6 months runway, don't we? You need 2 sales and Steam festivals and things you're going to need us to update. oh, fair enough, they understand. Again, it's just showing that you've thought this through. And then similarly with the budget side of things, be really smart on your budget. And the one thing I'd say here with the budget, you do sometimes see decks where people are putting different options. If we raise this much money, we'll do this. If we raise this much money, we can do this. We can extend a DLC. They're important strategies. I'm not saying don't do that. Sometimes that is right. But I do think, especially in those early things, go for the money you want. Put it in the deck and be really clear about it. Don't have all the options. It can just end up being confusing. You can definitely talk that through. And if a publisher's looking at a number and says, okay, yeah, I see that. Yeah, we invest between 500 and 750, you're right on the mark. You could say, well, look, really this project, we'd like to stretch to $1 million and we do a DLC. Those things can come into play in your conversation. They don't need to be illustrated here. If somebody's really serious in your project, that'll come out in future conversations. So be really clear about what you want, why you want it, and put it front and centre. I definitely bring this up with Australia and New Zealand teams. We have our imposter syndrome where we under-promise, over-deliver. Everything should be right. I don't need much money. And we ask for probably too little. I tell most studios here, ask for more money. Don't be unrealistic. But again, things like post-launch, just get all of that. We could all spend the money. So just make sure you get it all in there. Don't undersell yourself, because the decision's not going to come down. I mean, yes, there are publishers who have a hard, we don't invest over $1 million, or that they have a range. But a lot of them, the difference between 500,000, 620,000, they're not going to walk away from your project probably for that. That's not the decider in their conversation. So if you need an extra 50 or 100 or 75, as long as it's realistic and you can justify it, put it in there, because it's not going to break down the conversation. Unless they genuinely say, look, we don't do over 500. In this case, you could say, look, we could shave that 85. We can come back to another plan. But always have in that plan that what you actually want is that 585. So keep that in mind. And then in terms of your team, don't forget about who you are. Obviously, most teams will put that slide in, who we are, what do we do, but make sure, especially for those first projects working on their first teams, try and put your best foot forward as much as you can. What have you worked on? Even if you come from another team, it can be itch launch titles. Even getting games out on Steam or itch yourself still shows you've delivered a product, you got through milestones. Anything you have can go in to show the power of that team. And then also for the studio, because sometimes you get the best developers together and you start a new team, but they take time to gel and work as a team. So it doesn't always work that putting the best from a bunch of other studios comes together. It takes them time, probably takes them 1 to 3 games often to find their own rhythm. So just try and put as much forward. And really, you got to think about, why do they think you're the best team for this? Can you really deliver it? Are you going to hit the milestones? Are you clear on your vision? Do you know where that project's going? So all these things are really important. And then don't forget, this is a conversation. You need to qualify them. And I talk to a lot of people and say, who's your top 10 publisher? Who's your dream publisher? A lot of studios will say to me, oh, I haven't thought about that. It's like, well, who would you want to publish your game? You need to do some homework, understand who they are, and that's going to go a long way into understanding, well, do you fit into their portfolio? Are you the right fit? And if you can show them, they don't have to do a lot of the thinking. They might go, actually, no, you're right, I can see that. Yeah, I see where you fit, you've done your homework. So think about what their strengths are and why this is going to work for them as well. I mean, it's not just about money, it's got to fit into their portfolio and strategy and what they do. Think about what they're paying for, and as I said, be mindful. Those first few meetings, yes, you're asking for operational costs, you need this much reporting, etc. Those will come out in the conversations. But just be really careful, because you need to know that you have a say in it. You do see contracts where they're just stacking money on your cost. That $1 million goes up and up because they've flown people to Gamescom, and it's a portion of the marketing cost goes to you as a project. And that's legitimate. But do you have a say? Do you have visibility? Does your contract give you transparency? Do you get to see what marketing costs get a portion to your cost? Because you're going to pay those back in royalties. So just be really careful, but don't hit them too early. I mean, that should come out through your contract negotiation. And then what are their terms? I mean, those contract terms, again, obviously, there's some that have particulars that you want to know very early. That might be really important to the alignment to the studio. But make sure that you understand, and things like post-launch, don't have any grey areas. Make sure that everybody's aligned, because this is a long journey. This is a bit like a marriage certificate you're putting together, and they can go sour. So, yeah, you want to do your homework. You want to be in charge of that P&L that you have. And then what do they want to see beyond that pitch? So you've had that conversation. You've given them that deck. hopefully they're curious and they're interested and they want to come back. So find out exactly, well, what is the next step? What do you need? What comes out of Gamescom? How many of those, when will I hear out of those 200 decks you're going through that I should follow up? Be really clear what their next step is and push them on it so that they know, so you can chase them up further along the line. And then that's that next process for them, so just keep that in mind. And then the scary part of the business, what's your backup plan? Why do you need a backup plan? What am I talking about? I always talk about, well, besides who's your dream publisher, what's your plan B is what I say to people, and I say I don't really have one. You need a plan B because these are scary facts. Most pitches will not get through. Most games don't get a funding deal, especially on the first game. And then even when those decks get through and you're in that top list, it's such a small percentage that actually get through and get signed. So there is a good chance that you are going to be self-publishing, not by choice. So you actually want to be prepared. But everybody says to me, yeah, Simon, but we're just indie developers. We're just a team. We don't know anything about marketing. We've got limited resources, budget, all of these things. Like, this is all true. Publishing is not easy. And publishers struggle with all these things as well. So it really comes down to, well, what can you prepare? What tools have you got? What can you work with if you're on your own? And that's really what I want to talk about just for the next couple of minutes. You're probably already self-publishing. If you've announced your game, if you've got a Discord, if you've built socials, you've already started talking to an audience. That is actually self-publishing. You've started the journey. So you need to just think about that and think about that through the whole development cycle. It's running in parallel. It's not something you throw in at the end. So be really, really dedicate some time to this. And I'm not sure, it depends on your studio and your size. You'll usually add community managers, but as business leaders or developers, lead developers, you've got to make sure that you're aware that this is the part of the process. And in a perfect world, you'll get that publishing deal, but sometimes you get the publishing deal mid-process as well. So you might have done a year of your own sort of self-publishing and building. So you want to start that momentum, you want to keep building it, and then even if you do transfer it to a publisher, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're just going to take it and run with it. I mean, you've got to build that community and own that, and it's a valuable resource. So, but marketing in itself, it's not actually that complicated. I mean, you get to know your audience, you find them, you align your assets and messaging, and this is probably the part that gets missed, and I'll talk about this in a second. And then you raise that awareness and you amplify it. And it might be that amplification is what that publisher really does. You're probably doing these sort of 1 and 2 steps on your own from that early conception stage. So just keep building from that, keep doing that and just running that, even if it ends up being in parallel, because you're just sort of rinsing and repeating this cycle as you go through. And as I said, it is definitely a myth that publishers just come on board and they take that number 1 and 2 and you can just go back to development. So you want to keep and control that. So why would you do all this? Why would you self-publish as well? And we could talk all day about the pros and cons of self-publishing and publishing. We're not going to do that. This is really just about if you find yourself doing it, why would you do it? And there's a lot of reasons, and I won't go into too much talk about this, but especially coming from AAA, you'll hear about first-party data and direct relationships. The most powerful thing you can have as a publisher and a marketer is that direct relationship. And 10 years ago, I mean, early in my career, that's something publishers, they were the only ones that could do this. Nowadays, we have such amazing tools like Discord and things like that we can talk to that audience, even directly through influencers. So build that audience, foster that, and you want to control that. If you can own that, especially when you think about your publishing deals, it's often really good to make sure that you own your community channels and they don't own that, so that when you finish the game, you haven't lost that audience, you've got that audience. And why you have that is once you know that audience, it reduces the spray and pray of marketing. You're not just sort of scattergunning marketing assets. You're trying to find those similar players because you're trying to steal that market share. They give you feedback on the health check of your game. They're letting you know the positivity, what's there, and it gives you a whole lot of data that you can start to build your marketing plan. But then what do you actually collect? What do you want to know about your audience? It's things like, well, the player source. Where did they find out about your game? Was it an X-Fest? Was it a word of mouth? Things like this. What drives their awareness and influence? Is it influencers? Is it Steam reviews? Is it IGN, things like that. There's lots of reasons that could be interesting to them. And then we want to find out what they play. And this is really important. Do they really want that Switch version that you're planning to port? I mean, your game might be fantastic on PC and port to Switch, but Switch might be a thesis. Have you really thought about the audience? Does your audience that you're talking to actually want it? you can actually ask them. I mean, you can run a survey in Discord or do something. Give them a skin, give them something like that. They can help. There's a way you can engage with your audience and talk to them. And then that might give you some early signs. And then that's things like platform preferences. And then CRM, I mean, customer relationship management. Again, the big AAAs have sophisticated systems, and certainly in mobile, this is very sophisticated to have these first-party data sets that you can use for Facebook ads and targeting. Look, it's pretty hard as an indie to do this, but again, it's about having that mindset that you can still learn a little bit about your audience. You can run some surveys, you can understand who they are, and just try and gather that information. And then what would you do with it? If you put it all together, use the tools you've already got. I mean, you've got websites, you've got landing pages, you've probably got MailChimp, you've probably got a bunch of these things. It's kind of almost like hacking your own CRM. I mean, people don't realise, even with something as simple as MailChimp, you can do surveys and put auto tags and things in there that you could ask questions of your audience through email, and then they respond, and then that'll create subgroups within MailChimp, and then suddenly you might have separated your switch from your PC. So then when you send that next email, if you're sending a switch-specific email, you're not wasting it sending it to the other audience. So that's in itself just sort of building these cohorts. And look, you've only got so much time when you're in your studio to do this, but just keep that in mind. Just think about those polls and surveys. Think about ways you can actually talk and engage to your audience. And then, sorry, skipping through. And then lastly, this is really your marketing plan. And this is your go-to-market strategy. And look, it's not that unfamiliar to your milestone development cycle. It's pretty similar. And as I said before, think about those assets that you have. I think what happens as builders is we come in too late. We're trying to build that ramp from that early access or street date type scenario, and we're trying to build a massive tentpole really fast. Start from the start. When you announce that game, get that Discord, get those things out, and then as developers, think about all these beats or these points along the way. What assets are you creating? Every sprint, what have you got? Align it. It could be as simple as something that can be used and recut up in a TikTok video. Think about that, and this is more a discipline than anything else. I mean, if you can build games, you can do this. This is not complicated. It's about putting your mindset, allocating time, and making sure that you're running this in parallel and it doesn't come in the end. And then look, if a publisher comes in halfway through and you're hitting early access, that's fantastic because they're going to ramp that tentpole up tenfold. But you've probably done that first 6 months on your own. So build that community, build that up yourself. And then obviously this again is just going to follow through. You're going to own that audience. And the other thing that's important to note is indie gamers, it doesn't matter what you're doing in terms of marketing, it's the same process. I think there's a bit of a myth that there's this indie hipster out there who's playing indie games only, and yes, there's probably some of them, but we've seen from COVID that most of that growth in that indie game space has been your AAA high consumers. You play the big games, but you run out, and then you're looking for something else. And these can be time fillers, but that audience is just as receptive to this type of marketing because they see it all the time from Ubisoft and Activision, things like that. So try and just take some of that principle as best you can. Could just be some simple videos. And then what would that look like? I mean, it's really just keeping that persistence. Run in parallel. Use that go-to-market, design it from the start, put it along with your milestone, and then stay on track. It's persistence. Even just dropping a TikTok video or something like that every couple of weeks, might be really simple, will just build momentum. So don't forget about that. I talked about the MailChimps and tags and surveys. There's actually a lot of complexity and things you can do just out of the power of email marketing if you really dive into it, create some segments for yourself. Do you have a welcome email? How many websites do you go to and it's like, join our newsletter, and then that's it. It goes into the abyss. Never hear anything. Again, in some of these email platforms, you can set up an automated return that might just be, hey, thanks for looking in our game. Wishlist us on Steam. Go here. You can drive a call to action that's really, really simple. Doesn't take, probably only takes you 10 minutes to set up, but you've engaged and that player feels there was some sort of response. So these are things you can do even as an indie. They're not complicated. And then paid media. A lot of people come and say, oh, Simon, look, we don't have enough budget. We've really only got a few $1,000s to spend. It's waste. We've done Google before. Money doesn't do anything. Paid media could be as simple as you have a post on social that blows up. Just double down. Put $50 on it. Put $100 on it. Like if it's already working and resonating, that's still boosting paid media. So it doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing budget if you don't have it. There's still ways you can amplify those assets. So it's thinking about those assets you already have, making sure they're coming aligned with all of your beats, and then just try and amplify as best you can. And then this is probably not unfamiliar to most of you, but have an online festival plan. There's obviously Next Fest. There are so many festivals out there that you can get your game qualified. So again, just try and come up with a list. They're not all going to be for your genre, but try and submit those because they're free organic marketing that you can go for. It's definitely worth the time. And then what incentives can you entice? I mean, if you're sending them a welcome email, if you're asking them a survey in Discord, could you give them a skin? Is there something you can do early that gets you some information back or some engagement? Can they do a post if you give them something? You can turn them into a marketing audience that helps drive for you. So these are simplistic things that you can do as an indie or as a small team. So there's definitely, you've got tools. But in summary, for the 3 sections we've talked about publishers, we've talked about the pitching process, we've talked about doing it on your own. They all fundamentally come down to the same things. You've got to build that business case. This is really critical. It should be front and center of you as a business owner, because that's what you are in most cases when you're running a studio. It's about getting those conversations. That could be the pitching conversations with publishers, but it also is a conversation with yourself and your team. Make sure that you have your clear vision, you understand the product, you understand where it fits. And yeah, look, pitching and publishing is hard. If I could sit up here and give you a blueprint and hacks, do this, launch your Steam game this time of month, this is going to work. There's no blueprint. Otherwise, even when we're in AAA, every game would be a success. It's not easy. But making games is much harder. I'm not a developer. If you can build games and get it to launch, you can do an element of pitching and marketing. So it just takes that dedication. So that's really in summary the whole things here in terms about thinking and acting like a publisher. Hopefully that gets you into a mindset. I'll just touch on quickly a couple of things. So how can Xsolla help? We have our funding club. Some people know the funding club. People say to me, Simon, what does Xsolla do? And I joke, the elevator pitch takes an hour. So I'm not going to go into that too much today. But the funding club is, I mentioned before, this is a free service. It's a matchmaking service. It's kind of like the Tinder of matching you and lining you with publishers and investors. You get to pitch your project. We do curate them. We're not judging good or bad game. We're judging whether your commercial viability and your materials, your pitch deck is a proper pitch deck, and it's ready to go into a template that publishers, investors can spend 5 minutes on. So we're helping you get through that qualification process. So it's a great exercise. So anybody locally that's raising money, going for screen grants, there's no harm in going for the funding club. You'll get some good feedback, and it's completely free. Xsolla doesn't take any equity. We're not involved. It's a completely free service. And then the rest of Xsolla, this is what I call our vision board. It's too big, it's too much to go through in a few minutes that we have left. We're outside, we're here for the week, come and talk to us, and I'd love to talk to all of your studios, learn more about your projects, learn about the team, and just see how there's things that we can help with. But effectively, we talk about equal access and for everyone, and really you could probably sum us up as we're democratising access for your game, and that could be partly the distribution itself, it could be the distribution or the sale of your game's content, and we're really moving into a market that's sort of spilling outside of those walled gardens platforms. So we really help enable some of that. So come and talk to us. And then bonus tip of the day, I talked about the welcome email, but pet peeve of mine, make sure your website's got a link to Steam or where to buy your game. I don't know how many games websites I go to. I'm excited, I read the product page, there's nowhere to click. So yeah, that's a missed opportunity. They might wishlist you, they might pre-order, have that on there. Just make sure there's a link from that website, or actually any of the materials you have. Make sure they know how to find your game, get to your game, and actually buy that. And that's really going to help you to think and act like a publisher. So in summary, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I hope that's... And just a couple of quick resources. You should know about all of these, but I'll just finish up on these. So there's amazing resources out there that can help you with all of this. Indie games business, Jay Powell is a guy in the US who's been doing this for as long as I have, has a fantastic resource there. What they're great for is they have a yearly update of all the publishers. They do a spreadsheet. There's about 1,400 publishers. So if you're trying to find your dream publisher, have a look through that. Obviously, Game Discover Co, another Simon Carlos is fantastic with his newsletters and his Steam deep dives. We have How to Market a Game. Chris is also, again, amazing, has some really interesting books that you can tap into. And then Deconstructor of Fun, some listen, some don't. They used to be mobile focused, but fantastic podcast that talks about the industry. So again, just something as a resource. If you tap in every week, you don't need to read the news. They'll give you the update, but really gives you that mindset of what's going on in the industry and just gets you out of just the bubble of development and lets you know what's out there and what's happening. So thank you very much then. Have a good GCAP.